Well, hello again. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today we are going to share Wendigo and cryptids encounter stories. First story. This story was shared by you/Emma came back, so credits to him. The Wendigo became my friend. I visited my parents' cabin by the lake months ago. It's not something I like to talk about. I lost some friends up there, gained one very important friend. A mentor, you could say. And I had every intention of having a fun, carefree trip. Fuck. I guess in some ways I did. So many memories in such a short period of time too. The sweet smells of people I never noticed before. You go by most people and what do you smell? Some bullshit Old Spice or Axe spray of some loser trying to pick up a girl. But humans are so much more than these modern smells. They can smell like pine trees, fear and hatred, confusion and complete terror. There's a whole universe of sweet smells out there that most people miss. I didn't discover this until my trip to the lake. For the first day, everything went like I expected. My girlfriend and a couple of friends were having fun hiking and camping out. We were all having a blast until the rainstorm hit. I've never seen so much rain in my life. It came down in sheets and we barely made it back to the cabin. Kevin tripped and fell. Bobby yelped and said he wanted to go home. My girlfriend made it back to the cabin first. She held the door open for everyone else. Once inside, we made sure all the windows were locked to prevent water from coming in. Trouble was, the roof started to leak. We lit candles because there was no electricity. Fuck, Kevin said. We're all going to drown. Calm down, Kevin, my girlfriend replied. It will take months for the cabin to fill up at this rate. We're going to be fine. Kevin was completely right, except water wouldn't be his demise. Bobby didn't say much. He looked like a scared child in his corner, and he leaned forward on a rickety chair, biting his nails. We were all lost in our own thoughts. Especially me, I think. I was having thoughts I had never experienced before, thoughts of devouring. Of devouring everyone in the room in a rush of blood and destruction of the flesh. I even started to look at my girlfriend that way, which worried me. They were all trapped here, my girlfriend, Bobby, and Kevin. The rain was coming down even harder, and this little group had nowhere to go. They were completely at my mercy, and I couldn't be happier about this fact. Of course one had to be strategic. I told them I was tired from the ride up here. I got up, kissed my girlfriend on the cheek and went to my room. It was the largest in the cabin, and I had it all to myself. As I lay in bed, I felt something deliciously dark take over. I knew without having to confirm with some meaningless scientific instrument the Wendigo inhabited the room along with me. Hello, Jason. How are you feeling today? The Wendigo asked. Its voice was gravelly, a little off-kilter. Okay, I responded. A little down. Could it be that you have a craving for flesh? I thought about his question. Like, really thought about it. Some philosophers considered suicide to be the greatest philosophical question, but I disagreed. The human action most on my mind was whether or not to rend flesh from bone. The horned thing stared at me from across the room with piercing hollow eye sockets. I felt a feeling which seemed so lush and dangerous that I knew it wasn't good for me. I knew civilization was a sham, an abyss of houses, roads, and stop signs layered with bureaucracy and hazy ambitions to reach its peak. Illusions. "I'm glad you've come to see the light," the Wendigo said. I stood up, joints stiff, head swimming, but not in a bad way, in a pleasant "I'm drunk and shouldn't be driving" sort of way. What happened next I don't really like to talk about. It felt good though. I killed Kevin out back with an axe he used for chopping wood. And Bobby? Death by kitchen knife. I ate them both. I picked their bones clean, leaving them so bare and white you could put them on display in a museum. My girlfriend looked at me with such unbelievable horror that I knew I couldn't devour her like I did Kevin and Bobby. I ran away, into the woods. I've killed and devoured so many things in the wilderness that I've lost count. After the cabin massacre, I lived in a cave in the woods for a couple of weeks, maybe a month. The Wendigo would visit me, tell me tales of days long gone. I'd stare into its hollow eyes, get a fuzzy feeling, and I'd have to go on the hunt again. So for a while, the Wendigo became my friend. I was sad and deflated when it was all over. I'm back in the abyss of houses again, trying to think of an ambition that would excite me as much as what I did in the woods that day. Nothing yet. There's not even the thrill of getting caught. I know the Wendigo will protect me, erase any evidence of my dirty deeds. I have faith in that. I've told you about my first trip to the cabin, where I saw the Wendigo and he showed me the light. Its hollowed eyes gave me a glimpse of a world with infinite possibilities. I'll always remember that day. Absolutely beautiful. My second trip was memorable too, but in a different way. I went up there with 3 friends I made recently. None of them knew each other, and if they were acquaintances before I met them, I was unaware about it. The Wendigo gave me a certain charisma. It granted me preternatural insights into what made people tick. Didn't matter if they were popular or not. He taught me that despite social position, everyone had their flaws, things that made them human. Their pasts often scared them, and they spent their whole lives running from harmful memories. Or, in some weird cases, wallowing in them. Callie was the strong one, reminding me of my girlfriend, who I didn't want to see during my cannibalistic fever. She kept texting, but I just couldn't bring myself to expose my true nature to her. I know what you're thinking, the look of terror in her eyes, but that's not the same. People only see your true nature when you're gnawing on one of their limbs. Dylan and Marcy were the weak, blind sheep. Steeped in the land of crushes and instant gratification memes. Dylan liked her but tried to be smooth by ignoring her. She interpreted this as him having an interesting personality. Dylan drove, so at least I didn't have to listen to him speak, or interact with him very much. Callie kept looking over at me. I think it was because of how mysterious the Wendigo made me seem. I had centuries of interesting stories on my side. I seemed dark, dangerous, and brooding because I was those things. I thought I saw the Wendigo at various points as the wilderness went rolling by. He looked horned and wise, evil yet calm. His wasn't the kind of thoughtless evil you often encountered in horror books and movies. It was ponderous, almost ethereal. You didn't know quite what to make of it. I sighed in a near ecstasy, but it came out mellow. We got to the cabin, all sweaty and feeling tired. Well, except me. I thrived off of their lethargy and discomfort. Callie looked at me. Well, we're here, she said. Maybe we should, find a place to rest. It was such a clumsy attempt at flirting that I had to stifle a chuckle. Yeah, we should rest, Dylan said, glancing over at Marcy. He wanted her so bad, I could tell. Same for her. And, oddly enough, I started to feel uncomfortable, inhabiting their lust at the same time as I comprehended it. I saw theirs, but they didn't see mine. Funny how that worked. The afternoon went by, hot and sticky. Dylan and Marcy hid in their room for most of it. Callie tried to snuggle up to me, but I kept distancing myself. I still had a girlfriend. Me being a cannibal didn't change that fact. As night came, we all lit candles. Dylan poked his head out, clearly drunk, and asked for some matches. I gave him some. Now it's just you and me, Callie said, that gleam in her eye. I clenched my jaw. I could hear the crickets chirp, the raccoons scurrying about, coyotes howling. We were in the middle of nowhere, and my heart quickened, though not for the typical human reasons. I said I would go make us a snack. We had a huge kitchen facing the beautiful wilderness, so why not? It sounded like something a human being would say. The real reason? I needed a kitchen knife. If I didn't make Callie's death quick, Dylan and Marcy might come out. They might overpower me. Dylan was a beefcake and might charge at me and break my rib cage if threatened. I went back into the living room with my best charismatic smile. I felt a little ghoulish, but I saw the Wendigo behind her, sitting in one of the chairs next to the small table that faced the window. I heard the light pounding of a gong. It sounded far off, got closer, then faded again. If nothing else, the Wendigo taught me to be sneaky. To prioritize stealth above all. I told Callie the window might be pretty, just like her. She nodded eagerly, turned her back to walk over. Then I stabbed her in the back. Devouring her took minutes. I placed her clean bones in the storage chest in the hallway. I needed to take a shower. A bloodied-looking me would raise suspicion before I lifted the veil. 20 minutes later, I knocked outside Dylan and Marcy's door. Dylan answered, clearly pissed off. Hey bud, you do know I'm busy here, right? Yeah, sorry, man. Raccoon just got in. You want rabies? Dylan scoffed and closed the door. But a minute later, he reappeared, wearing a red shirt. Let's get this over with, Dylan said. He pushed past me and into the kitchen. I said I saw it in that general area. After a minute, he shook his head. I pointed to the screened-in porch. He opened the door and cautiously stepped through. I don't see anything, he began to say, but his phone buzzed. He looked down at it with a smile. The same smile he had on his face when he opened the door, and I knew him and Marcy were doing the thing that most humans craved. I took the kitchen knife, clean as a whistle, and plunged it into Dylan's back. He yelped and fell face first into a wicker love seat. Suddenly, I felt less lonely. The Wendigo stood there, nodding in approval. It occurred to me then that I might be more than just a cannibal. An avenger maybe. Dylan was devoured as an afterthought. He was tough and tasted like coconut chutney. That left Marcy. I knew she liked to read. Maybe I'd catch her engrossed in a book, utterly witless. Didn't matter, really. I just pondered the little surprises my life offered. It was sad in some ways, exhilarating in others. I did devour Marcy. She was mild-mannered, bleary-eyed, and confused me for the man I just killed. I gave her a polite hello, and that was that. I won't tell you quite how I ended her life. Her death seemed more innocent than the others. I can't put my finger on it. Afterwards, I gathered all their bones and rolled them up with the large carpet covering the living room floor. I dragged it through the woods, feeling elated and dreamy. I felt so awash in apathy before coming up here again. Now I felt completely amazing. So worth it. I went to the cave I visited on my first trip up here, for nostalgia's sake. At the moment, I had no idea why I was dragging the bones with me. My joints ached, but I enjoyed every second of it. The cave was as I had left it, scattered with animal bones. "Hello, old friend," I said. "Old friend," it echoed in my voice. The Wendigo sat on the largest pile of animals' bones and nodded. He extended his arm and pointed a finger near the ground. I placed the carpet stuffed with bones where he pointed, and bowed. For the second time during this trip, I felt my turn toward cannibalism had been for a reason. The Wendigo looked at me with those strangely wise eyes. It knew things I didn't, despite the bizarre experiences I had recently. "The season of the cannibal never ends," it said. So I made the cave my home again, thinking about things, broadening my philosophy. I thought about how similar this was to the last trip. 3 victims, going out to the cave and meeting the Wendigo, thinking about philosophy. But things had been different. I seemed to be connecting more deeply with people, seeing what made them tick, knowing them without having to know them. I felt like I had a purpose this time around, and that I would never take that notion for granted. Second story. This story was shared by you/Born Beach, so credits to Hi. If you see a man with crooked antlers, you need to read this as a matter of life and death. I sit down, pop a piece of spearmint gum and watch the woman across from me. She's nervous, her hands are fretting in her lap and her eyes are bloodshot. "Long night?" I ask. She looks up, timidly. Her face is awash in anxiety. She doesn't understand what's going on. She doesn't understand what she's doing here, sitting inside an abandoned warehouse with an asshole twice her age. "It's fine. I've seen it before." "Look," I say, loosening the tie around my neck. "It's just like I said. I only want to ask you a few questions, then you can go." "Why here?" she says, in a small voice. "This looks like the kind of place you'd take me to." "I don't know, murder me." I crack a smile. She isn't wrong. "You don't like it? It's private. Besides that, it's probably the safest place in the world for you." "Why? Do you have snipers on the rafters?" There's sarcasm in her voice, but her eyes still flick to the dimly lit steel walkways lining the walls. She pulls her sweater tighter around her, shivering at the draft. Or is this some secret government fortress? No, and no. I lean back in the wooden chair, and it groans under my weight. I'm not as slim as I used to be. It's much simpler, I say. This warehouse is the safest place for you, because I'm inside of it. It's not a lie. At least, not entirely. Still, she gives me an incredulous look. It's the sort of look one reserves for blowhards and narcissists, and I probably deserve it. Time to change gears. Tell me about the event. She studies me for several moments, and then shakes her head. On second thought, she says, picking up her purse. I think I prefer talking to the police. She stands up, makes to leave, and I don't stop her. Her footfalls echo across the empty warehouse, the haphazard lighting casting her shadow in every direction. I hear her mutter something beneath her breath, but I can't make out the words. I probably don't want to. Then, she stops. They always do. What's an event? She asks quietly. I click my pen, and reach down for my clipboard with a groan. My last job really did a number on my ribs. An event, I explain, is a paranormal phenomenon, most commonly characterized by contact with a sentient entity. To use a more common turn of phrase, it means you stumbled across an urban legend. She swallows. At this distance, I can just barely make out her expression, but I already know I have her. I bring my pen to my clipboard and clear my throat. You said your name was Amanda Haynes, correct? Yes. I scribble it down on my form. And the event occurred 2 nights ago, just outside city limits in the Cascade Mountains. Her sneakers patter across the concrete floor as she returns to her chair. Her expression shifts. Gone is the nervous shyness, the small posture, and the darting eyes. She's staring at me now. She's deciding whether she's in or out. Yes, she says at length. It was in the woods. We were camping. I check 3 more boxes on my clipboard. Stupendous. So far the location matches up with previous sightings of the beast. I sigh, resting the clipboard in my lap and place my pen on top of it. Why don't we start from the top? Before we do, she says, narrowing her eyes. How do I know I can trust you? This feels so bizarre. I offer. Dramatic. Like I'm in an episode of The X-Files. Fair point. You've seen my badge. Badges can be faked. I bring a hand to my face, tracing along deep scars. How about these? You don't get these working for television. She's quiet, skeptical, and her eyes drift down to the clipboard on my lap. She's analyzing it, determining if it's a real government form or not. All things I've seen before. She wants to believe, but she isn't ready yet. Let me ask you this, I say, handing her the clipboard. She begins looking it over. When you told the search and rescue team a monster attacked you, did they believe you? Her eyes meet mine, and I see it, the surrender. She knows as well as I do that I'm her only shot. What she doesn't know, is she's my only shot too. I've been looking for this legend for close to 40 years now. One might say it's been my life's work. I see your point, she concedes. Let's get this over with. She passes the clipboard back to me and I click my pen, bringing it to the box labeled Encounter. All right. You said that you were camping. Who was with you? Just Rachel, she says. Her eyes are filled with something. Guilt, maybe. We'd been friends since elementary school. We hiked together pretty often. Ah, I say, noting her name on my clipboard. Rachel Tully, correct? The victim. Amanda nods. We went up to get a break from the doldrums of city life. Rachel just got out of a pretty serious relationship, and I didn't want her cooped up in that apartment, stuck with all those memories. Her voice cracks. Emotion spills into her words. I suggested we take the weekend and go for a hike into the Cascades. There's an old trail we spotted the last time we were up there, just off the main path. I said we could follow that, see where it leads us. She brings a sleeve to her face, wiping at forming tears. Rachel didn't want to. She said she was too depressed to shop for groceries, much less go on such a big hike. I convinced her eventually, though. I see, I say quietly. How long was the hike? I don't know. It was a really old trail, overgrown in parts. There weren't any mile markings. Ballpark it. 8 miles, maybe. We left early that morning, and it took us 7 hours to get up there. I whistle, scratching at my gut. That's quite the walk. It's not that bad, honestly. We'd both done longer hikes, on harder trails. We actually didn't go as far as we intended. Why's that? We came across an old cabin. It was run down, with shattered windows, and it looked like it hadn't been lived in for decades. My heart pounds in my chest. I swallow the excitement before it has a chance to leak into my voice. I'd gone looking for that cabin 100 times. It was never there. A cabin? She nods. Her eyes leave mine, they're gazing off at some distant point on the ground, transfixed. She's replaying the memory. We figure it must have been an old ranger cabin, which would explain the overgrown trail that led us there. She pauses, her mouth hanging open, words struggling to break free. Rachel suggests instead of using our tents, we could just stay inside of it. I remind her the windows are busted and it's the middle of November. Plus, it's probably filled with spiders. She says all the better. Let's set up our tents inside the cabin. Double the protection. Amanda gnaws on her bottom lip, her voice growing smaller and smaller with each passing sentence. There's dark clouds above us. It was supposed to rain, but it looks worse than that now. A lot worse. It looks like a storm's coming, so I agree and we head inside to check the place out. What did it look like on the inside? I ask quietly. It looked like a nest. We spend some time walking around it. It isn't very big, there's only a handful of rooms, but there's branches and leaves all over the floor. Every step we take, there's a snap of a twig. The entrance leads through a small kitchen alcove, with a wood stove and dining table. Past that it opens up to a living area with some rotting chairs, and at the very end is a bedroom filled with splinters from a broken bed frame. The place is a mess. The layout sounds familiar. I can almost smell the cedar and feel the toasty warmth of the wood stove burning during cold December evenings. I check out the bedroom first, she says. I spot a couple of shattered picture frames. Call it the millennial blogger in me, or call it dumb curiosity, but I'm drawn to them. One is old, yellowed and faded. It looks like it could be from the 30s. It's a picture of a young man and woman, dressed to the nines. Probably their wedding day. She smacks her lips, and then looks up at me. Do you have anything to drink? I nod. Of course. I reach down and unclasp my briefcase, opening it up to reveal a stack of documents and 3 water bottles. 2 filled with water, 1 filled with a black grime. I grab the 2 filled with water, crack them, and pass one to her. We both take a sip. Thanks, she says, wiping her lips. All this talking works up a thirst. She twists the cap back on the bottle and continues. The other picture is more recent. I mean, still old, but not ancient. She laughs, but it's a nervous, self-conscious laugh. It's a photo of an older guy, and a young kid with this mess of black hair. The two of them are standing outside the cabin holding rifles. Interesting. Yeah, I figure it's probably the ranger that lived there, back when the cabin was operational. Before I can check out anything else though, I hear a snap. It sounds like wood cracking in half, and then a crash. I drop the picture frame and Rachel starts screaming from the other room. Screaming. I lean forward, my pen scratching at the clipboard. It feels too early for the callous man to appear. Certain criteria haven't been met. Still, if the work of my late colleagues has taught me anything, it's that legends can evolve. I keep an open mind. Amanda nods. Yeah, she's screaming bloody murder. I storm in there, my bare mace in hand, expecting to see a wolf or cougar or bear, but I don't see shit. I don't even see Rachel. I call out to her, and she calls back, but she's whimpering. The sound is coming from the pantry, just outside the kitchen alcove. I look toward it, but I don't see her there. I jog over, wondering what the fuck is going on, when I catch sight of the floorboards inside of it. They're busted. Splintered and shattered. There's a dark hole in the ground, one big enough for a man to fit through. I almost have a heart attack when her arm reaches out of the blackness. Amanda closes her eyes, takes a deep breath. She shouts at me to get her out of there. I tell her to give me a second, and I take off my jacket and put it over the jutting pieces of broken floorboards, because I don't want her getting impaled on the things, and then I reach down and pull her up. She's bawling her eyes out, hyperventilating, and once she's firmly out of the pit, she's pointing to her foot. I ask her if she's hurt, and she tells me thinks she twisted her ankle. Pieces of Amanda's event are beginning to connect in my mind. The twisted ankle. The panicked friend. They're all familiar ingredients, and the end dish is anything but delicious. She keeps talking. Rachel says we need to get help right now, and I'm a little thrown off by her panic. I mean, it's a twisted ankle, not a death sentence, right? Still, I pull out my phone and check for service. Predictably, there isn't any. I ask Rachel for hers, and she can hardly speak. She's still pointing, but this time it isn't at her foot. It's at the hole in the cabin floor. She keeps whimpering about dead things. Over and over. Dead things. Dead things. Dead things. I'm wondering if I just became a party to my best friend having a psychotic break, but I give her the benefit of the doubt and check out the hole. It's dark enough that I can't see the bottom, so I flick on my phone's light. Her fingers play at the tips of her hair, tugging at it. It takes me a bit for my eyes to adjust, but once they do, my blood goes cold. There's bones littering the ground. Deer bones. Rabbit bones. Then there, at the edge of my vision, I catch sight of a human skull. I'm swearing up a storm, and my imagination's going haywire. Rachel's hysterical, and I'm feeding into it. Both of us are repeating the words, "What the heck," like it's a personal mantra. Amanda takes a breath, holding it for a few moments. There's goosebumps on her arms. Even reciting the account is beginning to work her up. She exhales. Then I remember I'm not living inside of a horror movie. I remember what I thought Rachel was screaming about in the first place. I tell her to relax, that it's probably just a mountain lion, or grizzly's dumping ground. In the basement? I ask. Sorry, she says, hastily. I probably should have mentioned it earlier, but the cabin's raised off the ground on these wooden stilts. Where I'm at, it helps things avoid getting trapped beneath snow. There's a crawl space beneath it. I figure an animal was probably using the crawl space as some sort of shelter. I check a box on my form. The story matches up, so far at least. The cabin is identical to the one in my memories. The question is, did she really encounter the callous man, or some rabid wolf? A human skull is a promising detail, but it's not like predators don't occasionally snack on hikers. A logical conclusion to draw, I say. Does it calm your friend down? Yeah, Amanda says with a nod. Rachel starts to breathe a little slower. She relaxes a little. Eventually, she's ready to try standing, and she can, but just barely. She limps over to a dusty wooden chair near the fireplace and sits down in it, grimacing. She tells me she doesn't think she can make it back down the mountain. There's a crack of thunder in the distance. I walk over to the windows, and see the sun turning a blood red, setting over the tree line. Storm clouds are rolling in. Rain starts pitter-pattering on the cabin roof. Rachel's groaning in pain, and she shows me her phone. It doesn't have service either. You were picked up by a search and rescue team, weren't you? Yes. How's that, if you had no way of contacting them? You weren't gone longer than anticipated. Amanda sighs. I was just about to get to that, actually. There's an undercurrent of annoyance in her tone. She clearly doesn't care for interruptions once she gets going. I lean back in my chair. All the better for me. Like I said, Rachel and I go on these sort of hikes pretty often. Me more than her, but still. I come prepared. All-weather clothing, bare mace, flint and steel. You name it, I got it. I don't cut corners, so I made sure to pack my GPS locator beacon. It sends a one-way distress signal. Ah, I say, noting it in the report. A survivalist. The fire in her eyes falters, and she pauses. A moment of silence stretches between us, and when she starts talking again her voice cracks. Not as much of a survivalist as I should have been. Rachel wants me to use it, but I tell her no. Odd. Hear me out. Amanda's eyes connect with mine, and there's a pleading expression on her face. A desperation to be understood. Rachel wasn't in any immediate danger. Not then. Neither of us were. Plus, a storm was rolling in, and it looked like a big one. She takes a shuddering breath. I know the look. Memories are clawing at her mind. My father was a search and rescue technician. He was killed trying to rescue a couple of teenagers who got themselves trapped in a cave. Ah, there it is. The tragic backstory. I was wondering when it'd squirm its way out of her mouth. Somehow, all the human stupidity in the world can be traced back to our emotions overriding our will to survive. I scratch her reasoning down on the clipboard. I didn't want anybody risking their lives when we had food, shelter, and weren't in danger. I told her no. No way. I couldn't have that blood on my hands if something went wrong and, she trails off. And Rachel understood. Amanda gets quiet. She's staring at me, and there's that same look I've seen 1,000 times before. I want to roll my eyes, I want to spit in her face for being such a naive idealist, but I hold it down. Instead, I plaster an understanding smile on my lips, and nod my head sagely. You made the right choice. It was the only choice you could have made, knowing what you knew in that moment. It works. She perks up. Yeah, I suppose. So the two of you decide to stay inside the cabin then? You're not worried about the bear or cougar using it as a snack bar might swing by. At that point, we don't really have another choice. I'm the outdoorsy type. I've seen storms, and I know that the one coming our way is going to be a big one. We decide the cabin's our best bet, but we take precautions. I keep my bear mace close by, and we close all the doors. A cougar isn't going to open a door, and a bear might break it down, but only if it feels it needs to. It's far more likely to wander into the crawl space, safely away from us. Sure. Makes sense. I decide to put an extra layer between us and the front door though. Just in case. I clear out the busted bed frame and sweep the splinters from the bedroom floor, then I get to work setting up the tent. Her voice dies. Memories are calling to her again. Difficult memories. What happened? I ask, the hairs on my arms rising. Did you see something? She nods. Yes. Animals were running through the clearing outside of the window. They were running past the cabin. Deers. Rabbits. Then a whole flock of birds burst through the tree tops and started flying over us. I lick my lips. Yes. This is very promising. My pen scratches at the clipboard in excitement. The callous man has a defining characteristic, one unique to him in the realm of legends. He always comes from the same direction. Always. Which way were the animals running? Her voice is small. Brittle. I barely hear it over the sound of my pounding heart. South, she says. I write the word, and underline it 3 times. My fingers are shaking with excitement. My mind's racing. After so many dead ends and broken threads, so many killed and missing, it's finally coming together. I've found one. A survivor, and not only that, but one that might still have the link. How many animals were running? I ask. I know the answer, but I need to hear her say it. It takes her a second to get the words out. They're uncomfortable for her. Disturbing. All of them, she whispers. It was like an exodus of life. My heart hammers, my breath quickens. All of it, each detail of her story means one thing. The callous man is coming. 3rd story. This story was shared by you/girl_from_the_crypt, so credits to her. To all the wannabe cryptid hunters, stay away from my woods. Did you know that self-proclaimed cryptid hunters are a thing these days? Turns out there's 2 communities full of sick badasses who order combat gear on Amazon and drive out to supposedly haunted locations to explore and film themselves. Why am I ranting about this? Apparently, some shithead has shared the location of the plot of land that's been in my family for generations. Now, you'd think owning an entire patch of woodland would mean we're rich, but it's actually really costly to take care of. No forestry work can be done there, and our staff is constantly patrolling the area, looking for irregularities. It's a dangerous job, and we've lost more than a few hires in regrettable ways. Most of the time, when everyone's careful and meets the required precautions, everything goes over smoothly and the things in the forest are kept in check. I wish we could just fence the perimeter and be done with it, but due to reasons too complicated to explain right now, that's not an option. Plus, it's pretty lonely out here. You'd have to drive off-roads for half an hour to get here, so we normally don't have to deal with any unexpected visitors. There's a spot in my woods I frequent, a little clearing surrounded by tall trees and wild rose bushes. I always light a campfire there to sit at and relax. Right now, the ground is frozen over and we've had a lot of snowfall, but I don't mind the chill. I do so love those pretty icicles hanging from the branches. The clearing is my refuge from everything. I'm not good with people and day-to-day interactions exhaust me, so being by myself is something akin to an essential need of mine. Yesterday afternoon, I was hanging out in my usual spot, when suddenly, a voice called out to me from behind. "You! Turn around!" When I got to my feet, I found myself facing a young man of the very species I described earlier. Armed, cargo pants, combat boots and camo backpack. There was a small camera mounted to his helmet. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I asked, trying to keep my cool. He backed off, visibly puzzled. "I thought you were some kinda ghost." "I'm the legal owner of these woods, and if you don't get off my property this instant, I will call the police," I told him. Why are you wearing a wedding dress?" he stuttered. "This is my private property, I could dance around stark naked if I wanted to." "How on earth did you find this place?" "The woods? I read about them online. Someone posted about there being creatures here. Cryptids. So you thought you'd go check it out?" I squinted at him. Something wasn't quite right with that guy, aside from him being crazy enough to show up here in the first place. I could sense something looking at him, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Just a hunch, but my gut instinct never misleads me. Yeah. I'm a cryptid hunter. Or well, I don't hunt them per se. I guess I would, I just haven't been all that successful yet, he admitted with an awkward chuckle. Here, I said flatly. I couldn't shake the weird feeling he was giving me. "You're still trespassing. Say, did anyone stop you on your way in?" "No." "Why? Is there someone else here?" How the hell had he gotten past the security staff? There had to be a blind spot somewhere which he had accidentally come across. I decided not to let on how many safety measures we had in place. Better not to further pique his interest. "Nope," I lied, patting down my skirt. "Come on. Follow me, I'll see you out. Can't I just have a look around? If there is something in those woods, you'd be safer if I took care of it. I'm certain." I was about to send him on his way a little more firmly when I realized it. There was a disturbance in his aura. Something had set its sights on him. "Were you followed here?" I asked sharply. "What? No. I don't think so. Did you encounter anyone on your way?" "A man wearing his kaftan crossed left over right." "What's a kaftan?" I ignored the question. "Did you maybe notice a flock of birds at some point?" "Yeah, Sure, I mean, we're in the woods. There are no birds in my woods anymore, I said sternly. You're in danger. Something here's been following you. What? Aren't you a cryptid hunter? Shouldn't you know? Well, I haven't had many encounters yet. The man was starting to look panicked. You're trying to get a rise out of me, aren't you? His trembling voice told me he didn't actually believe that. I'm most certainly not. Trust me. I can tell, I can always tell. You've gone and crossed a spirit. A spirit? So there's actual paranormal activity here. And you already knew. We need to get you out of here. I hissed. Come on, help me pack up. Douse the fire. He followed my instructions while I hastily gathered my belongings. Then, we took off running. I spurred him on, hoping to get back onto one of the beaten paths leading out to safety. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I knew my companion was so much more afraid. He had every reason to be, and deep down, he knew. I didn't know what he'd expected, coming here in search of a thrill, but this was most likely too much for him. What did you do? I panted, not daring to slow down. You must have done something to upset him. Did you try to fell a tree? I shot at a rabbit with my crossbow earlier. I only wounded it, though. It ran off on me, he gritted out in between gasps for air. Who's he? I really didn't see anyone around. He can come in a lot of shapes, oh for crying out loud, I snapped when he tripped over a root and fell, sprawling across the forest floor. I grabbed him and pulled him back up, grunting under his weight. He was heavy as fuck with all that gear on. The trees were starting to let up, though. Hope renewed, I steered the cryptid hunter towards the light beckoning through the leaves. Keep going. We're almost there. He wouldn't move. I gave him a bewildered frown. What are you doing? Keep running, you dumbass. You've been shitting me this whole time, haven't you? He asked sharply. There's nothing to run from, is there? Oh dear God. Keep running, I repeated. If you want to live, you need to get out. Look, lady, I'm not gonna play along anymore. You nearly scared me shitless back there, I'll admit that, but the fun's over. I'll get off your property, sure, but you could have just told me, you know. He fell silent upon realizing that my eyes were transfixed on something behind him. It stood tall between the trees, its enormous, branch-like antlers stretching up to disappear in the foliage. Its head bore more resemblance to the skull of a diseased deer, bone exposed with bloodied strips of flesh hanging off it. Its body overall was humanoid, with rough, thick bark replacing its skin. Moss lined its back and unproportionally long arms, twigs and leaves sprouted from its wide shoulders. It glared at us out of gleaming green eyes. The hunter slowly turned around to meet the creature's gaze. His face fell. Kneel, I breathed, sinking down and lowering my head. The young man didn't react at first. It's too late to flee, I repeated in a low voice. Kneel and pray for his mercy. Finally, he dropped to the ground next to me. The leshy proceeded towards us, his steps completely silent. I had already had a few close encounters with this beast, and I had prayed not to evoke his wrath ever again. I could only hope I wouldn't be punished for the explorer's transgressions. I thought we had an understanding, you and I. The creature's voice chilled me like the icy forest wind. I felt one of its long, wooden fingers reach out to touch my face, tipping my chin up and forcing me to look up at it. "Forgive us, my lord," I said quietly, holding the beast's gaze. "Then will you let me have this mortal?" My eyes began to fill with tears. I couldn't bring myself to respond. "I'll ask you again, will you let me have this mortal?" "Please don't," I whispered. The man beside me had started to cry, sobs of fear shaking his shoulders. "Sweet soul. You do so hate carnage. I'll allow you to avert your gaze while I feast." Grasped by utter hopelessness, I turned the other way, hugging myself as I shut my eyes. Gunshots rang out, their volume stinging my ears. The explorer was probably firing away for dear life, but the futility of defending oneself against this creature with simple bullets didn't go lost on him. "Hey lady, do something." He started tugging on my sleeve, but I brushed off his hand. "Help me. I'm sorry for everything, please just help me." I couldn't. Not anymore. My blood ran cold when the explorer let out a gurgling scream and was dragged away from my side. His cries of agony mixed with the sound of crunching bones, flesh and muscle being torn and blood spattering. I felt it hit my bare back, warm and sticky, staining my white gown. Tears were rolling down my cheeks and my lower lip was bleeding where I'd dug my teeth into it. By the time the horrific noises had finally died down, it felt like an eternity had passed. A satisfied growl rumbled somewhere behind my back. "Be on your way now, darling. And don't bother my animals with your weeping." I left without looking back. At home, I turned on the shower to sit and cry beneath it. I tried to tell myself that this cryptid hunter wasn't a great loss to the world, but even if his hobby of choice had frankly been dumb and ill-conceived, he'd probably still been a normal guy despite it all. That's what I thought about while I went around my property, searching for traces of his entrance. I found his vehicle, a beat-up brown pickup truck, on the outskirts of the eastern side of the plot of land. I disposed of it discreetly. Poor guy. He'd only wanted to see some action. Though it could be held against him that he'd never looked up what a leashie was. The first time I'd encountered the leashie, I had known what he, or rather it, was. My mother had warned me, telling me that, while benevolent at times, he and those of his kind had a habit of stealing young women. I held her teachings dearly, and I still do, seeing as I actually inherited our land from her side of the family. She educated me about these grounds, about the dangers within them. Even before she died, I would take long walks through the woodland, setting up camp here and there and basically spending all my free time in them. The winter around the same time that I started wearing my wedding dress, I was taking a walk to check out the grounds after the first snowfall. A thin, delicate layer of pristine white covered the treetops and meadows, offering a beautiful sight. All was well until I spotted a figure approaching from beyond the tree line. I stopped in my tracks. Nobody was supposed to be wandering around here except for myself and my family's employees, so either this guy had gotten lost, or he was one of the local entities. He drew nearer and nearer, stopping just a few feet ahead of me. Taking in his appearance, my heart sank. He was wearing a kaftan crossed left over right. His bearded face bore little trace of emotion and he was holding a large cudgel. When he spoke, it was in a deep, snarling voice with a Slavic accent. "I've seen you in my woods before. You're the heiress, aren't you?" "Yes, sir," I pressed out, swallowing the lump in my throat. Then you must know who I am. Yes, sir. What am I to call you, heiress? I hesitated. I won't steal your name if you tell me, he said, as though he'd read my thoughts. I'm Fiona, I said breathlessly. You're very pretty. He tilted his head at me. I could love you, if your eyes weren't so lifeless. He paused before shouldering the cudgel and walking onwards. Send your mother my regards, he said over his shoulder as he passed me. Throughout our time as owners of the woods, the leashy has lured quite a few of our security staff members into traps. He'd lead them astray, they'd get lost in the woods and we'd find them drowned in the lake some time later. He did bring back my father's dog when it ran off that one time, though. Most of the time, he's neither hostile nor benevolent, but he is territorial. He likes to remind us of who's in charge. And of course, he'd have my head if I dared to disrespect him by putting a fence in his forest. He's not the only thing that might kill you when you enter our plot of land. And there's worse deaths than being eaten alive, believe it or not. You may have guessed it already, but this is a warning. Apparently, my property is being frequented by explorers or cryptid hunters. The guy that got eaten obviously couldn't have been the only one. Someone made us public. We're already implementing more security. This post serves two main purposes. First off, if you happen to be the person who first discovered these woods and shared their location online, please take it down. You're doing more harm than good. I don't know how you managed to make it out of here alive and unseen by me and my staff, but you got lucky. For your own sake, don't come back here. Secondly, and this is for all the others, if you've heard of my or any other haunted woods for that matter, don't go exploring. It's not worth it. Since you're so curious to see what's in here, I'll tell you online, at a safe distance. Fourth story. This story was shared by you/Rita-Nan, so credits to him. They were missing for less than 24 hours. I know that I'm not supposed to allow this information to get out, but I'm really afraid and lost. I'm a damn sheriff, I've been working in the force for 15 years, and I am admittedly scared fucking shitless. This morning, I got a call. This was not at all uncommon. Our town was small, the station only having a secretary and 5 deputies. They were all well trained, but I admit that they can be completely absent-minded at times and often need my assistance on even the easiest tasks. This morning was not one of those mornings. The call was coming from a voice I didn't recognize, but later would learn it was a family member of the force. Yesterday, 2 of our deputies, for anonymity's sake we'll call them Deputy Tyler and Deputy Harris, went on a group family outing on Tyler's boat. They never came back to shore. The lake is on the far border of the town. It's a pretty large lake, too. Probably about 20 to 30 miles. Our town happens to be the only town on any side of it. The rest of the area is thick with trees. Panic set into my gut immediately, but I pushed it down and let the woman on the phone know that things would be okay and we would figure out what the deal was. I heard a sigh of relief on the other end of the line and said my goodbyes before hanging up and dragging my ass out of bed. My wife stirred a bit, but just turned over and resumed her light snores. She was used to this by now. I arrived to the station to find my remaining 3 deputies pacing nervously around the Central Command, aka the main office. Apparently, they were fully aware that Tyler and Harris were missing. I did my best to calm them and set them down, treating it like any other larger-scale investigation. We began to discuss the basics of the situation. We were looking at a case of 5 missing people. Harris, his wife, his 12-year-old son Donnie, Tyler, and Tyler's latest fling. After about 30 minutes of discussing it, we got some volunteers together and started out to the lake. Around this time, I remembered that Harris's boat had a radio that was tuned into our stations. I clicked my radio on in my squad car and switched it to the station he'd be likely to use. Static. Still, I left it on for the remainder of the drive. I had just about given up hope when we reached the lake and saw nothing when the static cut out. I waited to see if anyone would speak before picking up the speaker. Hello? Is there anyone out there? This is Deputy Robinson. Silence. Then, something else happened. It was almost like a growl, but it sounded distant and quiet. I spoke into the receiver again. Harris? Tyler? If this is you playing a game, it isn't funny. Silence. Growling. Silence. Finally, it cut out to static again. I thought about relaying this to my search team, but ultimately I didn't want to upset them any more than they already were. We set out in 2 different search boats, opting to circle the lake and meet in the middle where there was a small island. It's about a couple feet around and has a singular tree. It's off limits to civilians because it's unstable. The sweep found us nothing, so we headed towards the center of the lake. As we approached the small island, I could see Harris's boat sitting a few feet away from the small land mass. The closer we got, the more clearly I could see. There were 5 people laying on the beach. However, when we finally arrived, I could see that they were not sleeping while they waited for rescue as I had stupidly hoped. I brought the boat as close as I could to the small island before turning off the engine and telling the 3 others that waited, looking on in horror. I jumped onto the grass, my shoes sinking a bit into the ground. With caution, I approached the bodies. The first thing that I noticed was that they were, in fact, the Harris and Tyler families, though some parts were missing. It was a goddamned gore show, the worst thing I had seen in my entire career. Out of respect for the families, I will be leaving out the details, but it felt like I had been transported into a horror film. I heard one of the volunteers vomit off of the side of the boat and decided it would probably be best to take them back to shore and come back for the bodies. I swear to God, we were gone for no more than maybe 15 minutes, but it looked to me like it was even worse when we returned. Fresh blood flowed out of wounds that weren't there before. Not just any wounds either. Bite wounds. As we started to move the bodies, one of my deputies noticed that the kid was still breathing. This wasn't just a recovery mission anymore. It was a rescue as well. Morale picked up a little bit as we moved the deceased into one boat and the young boy into the other. We rushed him to the hospital. Meanwhile, I called the medical examiner from the next town over. Ours had recently retired and were still looking for a new hire. I had my deputies accompany the boy while I opted to meet up with the examiner at the station. She examined each body carefully but swiftly. Her face was a bit pale when she had finished the job. "Sheriff, you're not going to like what you're about to hear." I nodded for her to speak. "Well, the bite wounds are human, but there's something else." I had begun to sweat. Human bites. What the fuck? No, she had to be wrong. Still, she went on. Each subject has flesh in their teeth. I won't doubt that if we were to do some tests, they would all belong to one another. For the first time in my entire career, I was dumbfounded. Right afterward, I got a call from the hospital. The kid died within minutes of arriving. They asked if they should send the body in an ambulance and I said yes. The examiner only took minutes on the body but confirmed that he, too, had flesh in his teeth. The medical examiner highly suggested that we call the FBI or the CDC. I have been sitting at my desk for hours now, and I feel like I'm losing my mind. I made the call about an hour ago. Both organizations are sending someone out. I keep trying to wrap my mind around this, but I just can't. They still had plenty of food on the boat from the day before. What would cause a group of human beings who were missing for less than 24 hours to eat each other? I am currently writing this update from a hotel room in the next town over. The past 3 days feel like a bad nightmare. Currently, I am breaking the law posting this. I wasn't going to update, but I don't think that any information on this will get out to the public otherwise. Only hours after posting my previous entry, a representative showed up from the CDC. She explained to me that the FBI had ultimately decided not to send anyone out unless it was a serious issue, which they currently didn't suspect it to be. This confused me. How the hell was 5 people performing cannibalism on one another not a serious issue? 2 of my deputies are dead and it's not a serious issue to them. The woman, her name was Teresa, and I sat down over a few cups of coffee to go over the medical report the examiner put together for each body. She requested that I send everyone at the department home, and I complied. All 5 bodies had an unknown toxin in their systems. It hadn't come from the food, so the origin was marked unknown. Teresa frowned at the files before stacking them neatly in a pile. Call your deputies back up. The search team, too. You were all out on that lake. If any of you are sick, we cannot risk further spread of infection. She stood up, grabbing her cell phone from her pocket, likely to call her team to move in and prepare for tests. Within 2 hours, everyone besides one volunteer was present and tested. Teresa approached me, a worried look on her face. You all seem to have tested clean, but we can't proceed until we've tested the missing volunteer, Morty Edwin. You need to get in contact with him immediately. I tried his cell several more times, but to no avail. Morty was an older man, in his mid-60s. He could barely operate the touch screen on his phone, but he still never missed a call. My youngest deputy, Kraus, and myself decided that we would stop by his place and make sure he was okay. We arrived at the house, dark and looking deserted. However, both cars were in the driveway. Knocking on the door, we heard crying inside. We knocked once more and slowly entered the house. Immediately, I saw the blood. The light peach carpet was spotted with red blackness. Mrs. Edwin lay on the floor. Parts of her were entirely consumed. Eyes, paled with age, stared blankly into the footrest of the old recliner nearby. The crying drew closer as Morty moved into view from the kitchen. He had an old sawed-off in hand. Entire chunks of flesh were missing from both legs and it seemed like he was struggling to even stand. He was crying. Even worse, he was chewing. Blood trickled down his chin as he looked at us with pleading eyes. He swallowed and spoke. God, why am I so hungry? I don't want to be hungry no more. With that, He turned the sod off on himself and blew his brains out. We called into the department and let Teresa know, and she said that we needed to come back immediately to be quarantined until they were sure we weren't exposed. We spent the rest of the night locked in a sealed office, praying to God that this all would end. The next morning, several more units from the CDC showed up. Teresa explained that in order to make sure that whatever this was didn't spread, they would have to visit every home and test. Throughout the next day, almost 24 families were found in their homes, just as Harris and Tyler's families were. Devoured. Dead or almost dead. Flesh in their teeth. About 200 more people, out of only 1,000, mind you, tested positive for traces of the toxin and were quarantined. A group from the FBI showed up only hours later to evacuate the healthy people. Most citizens were too afraid to resist, but there were a few that had to be arrested. My family and I were asked to leave as well. We've been at this hotel ever since. A lot of other worried and frightened families are here. The rest that couldn't afford hotel rates are being housed in the local high school gym. I've been getting calls non-stop since we left, mostly from Teresa checking up and making sure that we're all still feeling alright. The last few calls, she seemed more worried. Apparently, she has lost contact with my other deputies. They weren't picking up their phones. This is all the information I have, and it might be all the information I will ever be able to give you guys. I am scared shitless, and it is an entirely new kind of fear for me. I worry for my family and for my friends. Most of all, I am worried about the growing, unexplainable hunger that has been slowly rising in my stomach for the past 2 hours or so. Fifth story. This story was shared by you/Anthonybros, so credits to him. The Wendigo. I am writing everything down in this journal to document our journey to Fort Kent and the subsequent events that transpired afterward. I hope that whoever finds this journal will publicize what had happened in this town to us between the dates of January 12th to February 13th, 2018. Do you know of the Fort Kent Wendigo in Alberta, Canada? Most would say it is an urban legend, but after what I have read and experienced, my view has taken 180-degree turn. It all started when myself and a group of 3 friends wanted to make a Bollywood movie about the Wendigo. After spending 2 weeks of researching the Wendigo and what they looked like, I found the Wendigo of Fort Kent. Some say that a doctor locked himself in his house with his dead wife that had just died of smallpox. Then he ate her and turned into the Wendigo. Along with his wife, many of the townsfolk died from smallpox. Once the man left his home, he killed and ate the remaining dozen or so residents of the town. No one is really sure about what happened, but there is one fact no one can deny. Fort Kent became a ghost town and no one really knows why. After finding out all of this information, I knew that we had a great idea for a movie. The only problem was the place was pretty isolated. So if we got into any trouble, it would be days before anyone would be able to help them. Luckily Bobby's parents were filthy rich. Since they were both plastic surgeons, they spoiled Bobby rotten and gave him everything he wanted. Even so, he was a pretty down-to-earth guy and one of my best friends. Along with Bobby there was Mike and Kylie. As for myself, the producer of the soon-to-be movie, my name is Tara. So we took off in a small jet, heading from Ottawa, Ontario, Canada to Elk Point Airport, Alberta. We took a fancy Canon 80D DSLR camera with us to shoot the movie, as well as a portable field mixer, a wireless microphone system, a shotgun microphone and boom pole, wind protection for the mics, a field recorder and headphones. Along with all of that equipment, we brought camping equipment. When we got to Elk Point Airport, we rented a Hyundai Tucson, loaded it up with all of our equipment and headed for Bonneville. Now it usually takes 45 minutes to an hour to drive to Bonneville, but we were going in January. They had just gotten 24 cms of snow and the roads were heavy with snow. It took us 3 hours to get to Bonneville, where we got groceries and lots of alcohol for our month stay in the ghost town of Fort Kent. For a bit of background, the four of us have been friends since elementary and just graduated high school. We decided to take a year off before heading to college and came up with the bright idea of making a horror movie. Bobby's parents had given Bobby the sound equipment and camera as a graduation present. We spent the summer figuring out what we were going to film, when we came across the urban legend of the Wendigo of Fort Kent. Since then we have been obsessed about the film. After we had gotten the essentials needed for our trip to the ghost town, we headed for the fort. January 12, 2018, Day 1. We arrived in Fort Kent around 2 p.m. It took us 4 hours to set up all the tents and gear. We decided to set up near the outskirts of town. For some reason we felt more comfortable here. No one said anything, but everyone got more nervous the further we went into town. By the time we were all set up, the sun had already set and we couldn't see anything past the glow of the bonfire. We decided to drink the night away, talking about all the things we would do once the morning came. Around 10 p.m. we started to notice snowflakes starting to fall. We huddled around the fire more, but when the wind started picking up as well, we decided to call it a night. We had 2 tents set up, one for me and Mike and the other one for Kylie and Bobby. Mike and I lay on top of a blow-up queen-sized mattress that had 3 heavy covers on top of it. The 2 of us got under the blankets and looked up at the ceiling. I could feel Mike trying to get into my pants, but I shrugged him off. This place was giving me a bad vibe and I wasn't in the mood. The walls of the 8-person tent shook as the wind and snow plummeted against the tent, making it difficult to hear anything. At the time I didn't think anything of it, but I swore I thought I could hear the howl of a wolf through the sound of the wind. January 13, 2018, Day 2. I woke up around 6 a.m. this morning to Mike snoring beside me. His arm was draped around me as my eyes slowly opened. The tent was still and the sound of the wind was silent. I brought my hand up to his arm and pulled it off of me. I rolled off the bed and pulled myself off of the floor. I quickly got dressed. To my surprise, it was warmer inside than I thought it would have been. I put on a parka and toque and opened the flap that led outside. A foot of snow fell into the tent the moment the flap was open. I let out a startled silent beep and jumped back. I looked behind me, wondering if I had awoken Mike. To my relief, he was still snoring away. I composed myself and pulled myself out of the tent and into the snow. The snow crunched under my boots as I walked outside. I stood at 5 foot 8 inches and had the snow reach up to my knees, so overnight we had gotten a fair amount of snow. So it took me by complete surprise when I saw a set of footprints traveling through the snow around our tents. I figured that Bobby must have gotten up during the night and had a smoke. So again, I didn't think much of it. I looked towards the town. 2 run-down houses stood about 100 feet away. Then I looked to my right and saw our rental vehicle completely covered in snow. I spent the next 2 hours cleaning off the vehicle of snow. By the time I had finally gotten it cleaned, the rest of my friends had gotten up and started walking around. Bobby had taken out his camera and started to film the area. The last I had seen him, he was heading into town with Kylie while Mike came over to me. We talked a while about the project we were working on. We didn't have any shovels, so getting the SUV out of the area we were in was very difficult. Eventually, after much effort, we got the SUV out and onto the soft snow. The four-wheel drive made the situation a little better. We both got into the SUV and drove it through the town. We followed the footprints that seemed to go to each house in the town. Until finally the footprints went to a house and there weren't any footprints coming back out. We parked the SUV on the side of the road, got out and headed to the house the footprints went to. Turns out, the house had looked like someone had been living in it recently. We found them in the basement. Bobby was filming writing, which was covering every square inch of the basement. On one side of the wall it read, "Beware the Wendigo." As the writing went along the wall, the writing got more and more messy. By the end, the writing became scratches in the wall. Finally it read, "I am the Wendigo." We did some more shooting, making an introduction to the movie. By the time 4 p.m. came around, we decided to head back to the campground and pack it in for the night. By the time we got back to camp, it was pitch black outside. We parked the SUV beside the tents and all four of us headed inside mine and Mike's tent. We continued to drink and had a cold dinner from soup cans. We played cards until 10 p.m., right until we heard a howl coming right outside of our tent. We had been talking pretty loudly, so we hadn't heard it approach. We could hear the sound of crunching snow under heavy footprints. Then its shadow cast itself on the tent and the only thing we could see were its legs. Not only was the creature bipedal, but it was huge. Mike was about to open the flap to check what it was, when we heard the sound of metal being torn to pieces. The sound of the car alarm going off as it did. I wanted to scream, but I was too terrified to do so. Soon the sound of metal being torn to shreds stopped and silence ensued. I was about to let out a sigh of relief when I heard another howl. Then the sound of the other tent being torn to shreds could be heard. After another 5 minutes, the sound faded and we could hear the creature walking away from our tents. We waited until midnight to get out of our tent and see the damage. The car and tent were destroyed. We had left most of our food in the car, and from what we could see there was no food left. Kylie started to cry and Bobby tried to console her, while Mike and I just stood there in shock wondering what we would do next. Bobby had brought his camera into our tent, but the sound equipment he had been in his tent and was now destroyed as well. We realized that our project was finished and we would have to go back to Bonneville in the morning. We didn't get much sleep that night and this was only the tip of the iceberg. Our stay in Fort Kent was only just starting. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.